Hey guys, welcome back to Guys That Magic. It's me, it's Steven. I'm joined by David. David, say what's up.
What's going on?
Well, David, I am super excited. We're back. This time we are doing the Food and Fellowship $300 upgrade. I'm super excited for this, David. Got to see a little bit of the $100 in our Precon upgrade. Stay tuned for that, guys. Tell me a little bit about the deck. Obviously, Hunter took the lead on the last one. I kind of want to hear what you got.
Yeah, so I mean, this is essentially just going to be expanding off of the 100. We're still going to be using Frodo and Sam as our commanders. Basically, they're just going to be like low to the ground value engines. We want to have the ring tempt us a couple of times. That way we can maximize that, make our creatures kind of pseudo unblockable. And then later on in the game, whenever we've been tempted enough times to be able to take advantage of those third and fourth modes, so put them on some of our larger creatures and make our opponents hurt.
Awesome, man. Well, all right. Well, for the viewers at home, go ahead and give us a little rundown on Frodo and Sam one more time.
Yeah, no problem. So, Frodo, Adventurous Hobbit, is a white and a black, total of 2 mana. It's a legendary creature, Halfling Scout. It's a 1/3, and it says that it has partner with Sam. We'll talk about him here in a moment. But Frodo's got Vigilance, and it also says whenever Frodo, Adventurous Hobbit, attacks, if you gain 3 or more life this turn, the ring tempts you. Then, if Frodo is your ring bearer and the ring has tempted you 2 or more times this game, draw a card. So he just makes her a really powerful ring bearer himself. Just because, well, I mean, obviously you want to be able to get in with him and he's a card draw outlet, but also because he's going to start tempting you too, which is really nice. Sam, Loyal Attendant, is going to be his partner pairing. He is 1, a green, and a white, total of 3 mana for a legendary creature, Halfling Peasant. He's a 2/4 with partner with Frodo, and he also says at the beginning of combat on your turn, create a food token, and activated abilities of foods you control cost 1 less to activate. So makes them a little bit cheaper. They only cost 1 mana instead of 2 for you to pop it and gain that 3 life.
I mean, that's a pretty good combo right there. I'm not going to lie to you.
I mean, the two do obviously synergize very well. I do like Frodo quite a bit more. I feel like Sam actually doesn't really do anything on his own. But yeah, they do synergize really well.
All right. All right, well, let's dive into it. Are there any changes that were kind of made from the $100 list at all?
Yeah, so before I dive into that, if you haven't done so already, I do recommend check down in the comments below, and we'll have it linked, the $100 video as well as the Mox link for the $100 list. There are a couple of cards that I did switch out between the 100 and the 300. I did decide to cut both Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, as well as Witch King of Agmar. Those are 2 cards that I threw into the $100 list. I felt like they did really well there. However, now that we have a little bit more money for us to play around with, I've got some cards that I would prefer to have in here instead.
All right, well, talk to me about those fun cards.
All right, so the first creature card that we're going to talk about is Serra Ascendant. This is 1 white mana for a creature human monk. It's a 1/1 with lifelink. It says as long as you have 30 or more life, Serra Ascendant gets +5/+5 and has flying. I know that this isn't necessarily like tempting us or anything like that with a ring, but it's a 1 mana 6/6 with flying and lifelink if you drop this on turn 1. Serra Ascendant is one of the most powerful 1-drops in the game and can be an absolute beater. Your opponents really need to be able to kill this as soon as possible. Otherwise, you're just going to be able to put a ton of pressure on early on, and this is really going to pad your life total.
Yeah, this is like, I feel, an automatic include in any kind of deck that's doing life gain shenanigans.
Yeah, if you haven't guessed it already, we are going to focus a little bit more on the life gain aspect whenever it comes to this deck. So Serra Ascendant slots in there just as kind of the first card that I thought really worked well here. The next one that we're going to talk about is Lathiel, the Boundless Dawn. This is 2, a green, and a white for a total of 4 mana. It's a legendary creature, Unicorn. It is a 2/2 with lifelink and says at the beginning of each end step, if you gain life this turn, distribute up to that many +1/+1 counters among any number of other target creatures. We're just going to be capitalizing with our food tokens, being able to sack our food tokens, gain 3 life, and then be able to trigger this to make our other creatures quite a bit bigger.
Yeah, this is pretty good. I'm not gonna lie to you, especially being able to distribute 3 counters on the crack of a food token for 1 mana with Sam out.
Continuing to capitalize on that life gain, next card we're going to talk about here is Heliod, the Sun Crowned. This is 2 and a white for a legendary enchantment creature, God. It is a 5/5 with indestructible and says as long as your devotion to white is less than 5, it is not a creature. It also says whenever you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature or enchantment that you control, and you could pay 1 and a white to give another target creature lifelink until end of turn.
All right, David, before we go on, I'm going to ask the question that's on everybody's mind watching this video right now. Is Walking Ballista in this deck?
Walking Ballista is not in this deck. I did not build this list with combos in mind. Just good old beating your opponents to death with Frodo. The way that Magic was intended to be played.
Understood. Let's move on.
That doesn't mean that we can't make Frodo really big, though. And next up, we have Archangel of Thune. This is 3 and 2 white for a creature angel. It's a 3/4 with flying and lifelink, and it says whenever you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control.
That's a bit aggressive.
So those are going to be the cards that we really have. Those are going to be the creatures that are really going to start to care a little bit more about just the life gain aspect of things, helping to make sure that we get a lot of extra value off those food tokens. The next group of creatures I'm going to talk about are going to be a little bit more utility based. So I felt like they fit in with a role for the deck that helps the deck out, but it's not necessarily life gain themed. The first one here is Benny Brack's Zoologist. This is 3 and a white for a legendary creature elf druid. It is a 3/2 with Convoke, and it says at the beginning of each end step, if you created a token this turn, draw a card. He draws a card for us every time we make a food token, so long as we have Sam in play, it'll be each of our turns. Mondrak Glory Dominus is included here as well. This is 2 and 2 white for a total of 4 mana. It is a 4/4 legendary creature, Phyrexian Horror. It says if one or more tokens would be created under your control, twice that many of those tokens are created instead. It also has an additional ability on it where you can pay 1 and 2 Phyrexian white mana to sacrifice 2 other artifacts and/or creatures and put an indestructible counter on Mondrak. So just generally a good value engine, and it can be a pretty solid beater in the case that you need that too.
I mean, that's pretty good just because as soon as you create 1 food token, it makes 2 that you can then sacrifice to make it indestructible. That's pretty solid there.
Plus, I mean, even in the case that we don't want to necessarily pay for the 3 mana on that, we can always pay some life. We are a life gain deck, so losing a couple life on the Phyrexian isn't really going to hurt.
Life is a resource, David.
Next up, we have Dothy Voidwalker. This is 2 black mana for a creature, Dothy Rogue. It is a 3/2 with Shadow. Shadow says that this creature can only block or be blocked by other creatures with Shadow, but it also says if a card would be put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, exile it with a void counter on it. You can then tap and sacrifice Dothy Voidwalker, choose an exiled card an opponent owns with a void counter on it. You may play it this turn without paying its mana cost. Not gonna lie, Dothy Voidwalker's in here because he actually makes a very efficient ring bearer, and he's really good up against some specific graveyard decks, particularly one that we're probably gonna play against.
Yeah, I have no idea what you're talking about.
So very good card here. And then the last 2 creatures, they are Mana Dorks. This deck is really weird. Our commanders cost 2 and 3 mana respectively, so we actually want our mana production or our mana ramp to come down kind of on just turn 1 all the time. Otherwise, we're going to be competing with whether or not we want to get our commanders in play, and the answer for this deck is almost always get your commanders in play if you can. So the first card here is Elves of Deep Shadow. This is a green mana for a creature elf druid. It's a 1/1 that you can tap to add a black to your mana pool. Whenever you do that, it deals 1 damage to you. That 1 damage doesn't really matter, but it is super important that this does tap for a black, meaning that so long as you can get this in play, you'll have black and green. All you need is that white, and you're fully operational. Speaking about that white, we have Avacyn's Pilgrim included here as well. This is a single green mana for a creature human monk. It's a 1/1 that can tap for a white mana.
David, loving the cards we've added so far creature-wise. Dothy Voidwalker makes me sad, but I'm sure you added some more fun shenanigans. Did you add any enchantments or anything like that?
Yes, we're going to be throwing 3 enchantments in this list. So the first enchantment, and kind of the elephant in the room, we are going to be putting Exquisite Blood in this list. This is 4 and a black for an enchantment that says whenever an opponent loses life, you gain that much life. Not only does this help us out with the life gain that we're going to be implementing in, it also works really well whenever it comes to the 4th mode on the ring, if we can get to that point. And then lastly, and probably the biggest reason why this is going to be included, is because the Precon has Sanguine Bond, which is an enchantment that says whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. If you have both of those cards in play, Exquisite Blood and Sanguine Bond, so long as any player's life total changes, you win the game.
I don't like that.
Another one of our enchantments here, we want to try and slow our opponents down by a little bit, as well as potentially make a couple jabs at their life while also helping to pad our life total. This card is Blind to Obedience. It is 1 and a white for an enchantment. It says artifacts and creatures your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. It also has Extort. That says whenever you cast a spell, you may pay either a white or a black, and if you do, each opponent loses 1 life, and you gain that much life, which is great because if you have 3 opponents, you pay 1, you gain 3 life. That's enough to proc Frodo.
Yeah, it's pretty good right there.
And then the last one, because we don't like being attacked, we have Ghostly Prison in this list. This is 2 and a white for an enchantment that says creatures can't attack you unless their controller pays 2 mana for each creature they control that's attacking you.
David, some pretty strong enchantments. I really do enjoy the fact that the Exquisite Blood and the Sanguine Bond combo is in there. I'm not going to lie to you. Blind Obedience obviously doing some work and really synergizing with your commanders. And obviously, Ghostly Prison doing its thing. You hate to see that hit the field. All right, well, tell me about the instants and the sorceries. Any playing around with that?
We are adding 1 instant into this list and 0 sorceries. So the only card that we're going to mess around with here is Flawless Maneuver. This is 2 and a white for an instant that says, if you control a commander, you may cast a spell without paying its mana cost. And it says the creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. Really, I mean, this synergizes really well with our deck because our commanders cost 2 and 3 mana respectively. Chances are we're probably going to have at least one of them in play throughout the entire game. So Flawless Maneuver should hopefully be free so long as it's in your hand.
Yeah, I mean, having your entire board be indestructible, especially during a board wipe, it's a pretty good call.
We have just a single artifact in this list, and that's going to be Talisman of Resilience. It's a 2-mana artifact that can tap for a colorless, or you can tap to add either a black or a green to your mana pool, and it'll deal 1 damage to you if you do that. I know that I talked about 2-mana ramp earlier on in this video, and how it's a little bit awkward, and yes, this card is still awkward. But I promise you, I'm putting it in here for a reason. We still need mana production, and you'll see why whenever we get to the cuts.
David, you're going to hurt yourself.
I'm not really worried about hurting myself in this deck.
Yeah, there's a lot of life gain in here. Well, I love the additions of these cards so far. Did you do anything to the mana base?
I did. I tried to fix up the mana base as best as I could. I will actually just kind of say right off the bat, the mana base of this deck is probably the weakest part of it. Having 2 commanders that are so cheap means that you have to have pretty much all 3 colors by turn 3 in order for this deck to really operate well. Missing a color can pretty heavily stutter you. We are going to be throwing in 2 of the bond lands. Hopefully that helps to mitigate this. The first of which being Vault of Champions. It says that whenever it enters the battlefield, it enters tapped unless you have 2 or more opponents, and it can tap for a white or a black. We're also going to put in Bountiful Promenade, which does the exact same thing, enters the battlefield tapped unless you have 2 or more opponents, but this one taps for either a green or a white.
2 really amazing lands, for sure.
We're going to be throwing in 2 shock lands in here as well, the first of which being Overgrown Tomb. This is a land that is both a swamp and a forest. They're going to tap for either a black or a green, and it says whenever it enters the battlefield, it does so tapped unless you pay 2 life. And then also we have Godless Shrine here as well. Same exact kind of thing where you have to pay 2 life to have it come in untapped, but it'll tap for either a white or a black. And then lastly, because in my, dozens of times where I was tinkering with this deck, I felt like we just kind of needed to fix the basic land situation just a little bit more. So we're throwing in 1 Plains.
I mean, listen, every Plains has a Shire. Every Shire has a Plains?
No, I mean, I would like to think that the Shire is a Plains, but in this set, at least it taps for green. So maybe the Shire is a forest.
Fair enough. Speaking of Shires, David, unfortunately, with additions do come cuts. Which cards are leaving the Shire?
Well, we have quite a bit of hobbits, halflings. They're going to end up getting removed here. And I'm sorry to say it, I would love to keep this thing as just like hardcore halfling tribal, but many of them aren't great. And I feel like some of them are actually just straight up polarizing. The first card that we're going to cut here is Banquet Guests. This is X, a green, and a white for a creature halfling citizen. It is a 0/0 with affinity for food. It has trample. It enters the battlefield with twice X+1/+1 counters on it, and you can pay 2 mana, sacrifice the food, and give it indestructible until end of turn. This card does a lot. This card is also really expensive to make it actually do much of anything at all. And my problem here being is it's designed to kind of make itself cheaper a little bit for having that affinity for food. But I've often felt with this deck that typically you only ever have 1 food out at a time because you are continuously consuming that so that the ring can tempt you with Frodo. Banquet Guests, I've just kind of felt like for the most part, it sounds really good. It just doesn't play that well.
I mean, I'm kind of with you, man. I mean, it's a good card and it reads really well. but I feel like with the creatures you've added and the +1/+1 counters you can already put on all of your creatures, not just one, I think it's going to be more beneficial.
The next card here is Bilbo Birthday Celebrant. Very sad to see this one leave. This is a white, a black, and a green, total of 3 mana. It is a 2/3 legendary creature halfling rogue. It says if you would gain life, you gain that much life +1 instead. And it also says you could pay 2, a white, a black, a green, tap it, and exile Bilbo Birthday Celebrant. Search your library for any number of creature cards, put them onto the battlefield, then shuffle, and activate only if you have 111 or more life. Same kind of thing. I feel like this card reads really well. However, we almost never have 100 or 11 more life. And typically, if we do, I feel like we're walking ourselves into a board wipe that is just going to kill us because that's everything in our deck that's going to die.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little sad that you're giving this guy the boot on his birthday, but I guess it'll be okay.
I mean, pretty thematic. He's going to disappear. Next up, we have Butterbur, Bree, Innkeeper. This is 2, a green, and a white for our legendary creature, Human Peasant. It is a 3/3 that says, at the beginning of your end step, if you don't control a food, create a food token. Same kind of thing. I don't know. I just feel like for the most part, we've either got a food or we have no food, so this makes one, and then we'll just make more on our next turn, so this just doesn't do anything past that point. And having a 4-mana 3/3 that doesn't do anything is really bad. So Butterbur's got to go. Farmer Cotton is X, a green, and a white for a legendary creature halfling peasant. It is a 1/1 and says whenever it enters the battlefield, create X 1/1 white halfling creature tokens and X food tokens. If you have a ton of mana that you can sink into this card can be okay. But oftentimes, I don't know, I just felt like this was a dead card in my hand a lot of the time, and it really just never turned out to be all that impactful. So we got 2 other hobbits that are going to be leaving the Shire or leaving our deck. The first of which being Pippin, Warden of Isengard. He's a black and a green for a legendary creature halfling advisor. It's a 2/2 and he's got a partner pairing, but that's not really important for this deck because he's not our commander. He does say that you can pay 1, tap him, and create a food token, or you can tap him, sacrifice 4 foods, and other creatures you control get +3/+3 and gain haste until end of turn. Activate only as a sorcery. The food production on Pippin, I don't really think is all that important. Having Sam in our command zone just does this for us for free every turn. Pippin having to tap to make a food means he's also only doing it once per turn, but now we have to pay for it. And I know that tapping him and having this massive pump for our team sounds really impactful, but that's 4 foods. I don't know if I've ever actually, through my playtesting with this deck, ever had 4 foods laying around. And then sadly, we are going to be cutting Rosie Cotton of South Lane. This is 2 and a white for a legendary creature halfling peasant. It is a 1/1 and says whenever it enters the battlefield, you create a food token. It also says whenever you create a token, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control other than Rosie. I still like that second mode. I didn't really care so much for the ETB. I don't know. I felt like for the most part, if we were making a ton of tokens, we were probably in a pretty good position to begin with. So although that +1/+1 counter can be impactful, it oftentimes just didn't quite do enough for me. And Rosie having only 1 toughness, she's very fragile.
Is this one of those cards you feel like if you could put 1 card back in the deck, is this one of those you'd probably slap back in?
To an extent, yes. I really do like that the second mode of being able to put a +1/+1 counter on it. But at the same time, I felt like this was a card that generally wasn't very good if it was just her, Frodo, and Sam in play. But if I had other cards out there like Peregrine Took, for example, which would make additional tokens, or even just things that would go absolutely nutty with this, things like Academy Manufacturer, it got really powerful and impactful then. But I feel like that's just kind of like a win more at that point.
For sure.
Rapacious Guest is also going to be getting removed here. This is 2 and a black for a creature halfling citizen. It's a 2/2 with menace, and it says whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, create a food token. Whenever you sacrifice a food, put a +1/+1 counter on Rapacious Guest, and whenever it leaves the battlefield, target opponent loses life equal to its power. This card never really did much of anything for me. 3 mana is, I don't know. I feel like this deck is so awkward with its low drops because this is a card that you want to get into play as soon as possible. But even if you ramp, like this is not coming down until after Frodo and Sam have already come into play. So this is probably like a turn 4 card. in which case it starts to get a little bit slow. Also, Shire Sheriff is going to be removed here as well. This is 1 and a white for a creature halfling soldier. It's a 2/2 with vigilance. It says whenever it enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice a token. Whenever you do, exile target creature an opponent controls until Shire Sheriff leaves the battlefield. These kind of effects are always cute. However, if your opponent has any interaction whatsoever, they just kill this thing, and then they get their creature back. So it doesn't really do a whole lot. I don't know. If anything, worst case scenario, they can just double down on ETBs.
Yeah, I really do like this card, but I do 100% also agree with you that as soon as this hits the field, you get rid of somebody's stuff, they are gunning for you pretty hard.
Yeah, nobody likes having their things taken away, especially knowing that they can get it back if this thing just dies.
Mm-hmm.
This is the last creature we're going to be removing. Essence Warden. This was a card that I actually struggled with quite a bit. In fact, actually, just kind of spoilers. Originally, my $300 build was quite a bit different than this, and I really tried to capitalize on the Essence Warden style effects by actually putting in other Soul Sisters as well. But I felt like the deck it wanted to become something that it wasn't. So I decided ultimately I was going to remove this card as well, make room for some other stuff. Let me go ahead and talk about what Essence Warden does, though. It's a single green mana for a creature elf shaman. It's a 1/1. It says whenever another creature enters the battlefield, you gain 1 life. This is a really powerful effect. I love that this is only 1 mana, and it's going to gain you a ton of life over the course of a game, so long as it just can sit around. But it's almost never going to gain you 3 life in a single turn on your turn. And that's why I'm removing Essence Warden.
Tough cut, but I definitely do understand it.
Yeah, our deck is a little bit weird. We want to gain life, but we specifically want to gain 3 or more life. And there's a pretty solid chance with Essence Warden we just gained 1 or 2, in which case she's not really doing anything.
All right, David. Well, if that wraps up the creatures, let's get into some enchantments. You added a couple. Did you get rid of any?
We are going to be removing a single enchantment here, and that being Call for Unity. This is 3 and 2 white, a total of 5 mana for an enchantment that has Revolt. It says at the beginning of your end step, if a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn, put a Unity counter on Call for Unity. And then creatures you control get +1/+1 for each Unity counter on Call for Unity. All right, here is my issue with this card. This is one of those cards that reads so well. Our deck is making food, we're consuming that food, we're going to be putting counters on this and making all of our things really big. And in theory, this should help me win the game. In reality, throughout all of my playtesting with this deck, this is a 5 mana card that is sitting in my hand that I never really want to play. I know that, yes, it helps me out with my board state, but I often feel like with this deck, I'm already being taxed and then I have to pay at least 1 mana to pop a food. And I have to do that pretty much every turn. So this is like a 6 drop. If this came down on turn 4, or ideally even cheaper than that, then I can definitely see this being in this deck. My problem here just being is it's really slow. It might only do +1/+1. It maybe will get to +2/+2, but ultimately, even with that effect, say for example, you take advantage of it and you swing it at your opponent. If your opponent has instant speed enchantment removal, this is going to go away. Your creatures don't get the buff anymore, and chances are you just walked into attacking into much bigger blockers than what you can afford. So,
I mean, what are the chances somebody has a Return to Dust in their hand?
well, whenever I play this card, pretty high.
Yeah, 1000%, dude. This hits the field. I mean, I definitely understand your point on why you got rid of it. But I mean, I do feel like as soon as this hits the field, everyone's eyes kind of start gazing right at you.
Yeah, it's slow and like it generates a lot of hate, and because it's not actually putting +1/+1 counters on our creatures, because this pump effect isn't going to just like stick around if this thing dies, it can be backbreaking whenever your opponents remove this.
All right, David, what artifacts did you get rid of?
So the first one, this is Chromatic Lantern. It's 3 mana for an artifact that says lands you control have tap to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, and you can tap to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Oh boy. A little bit of personal bias here. I actually do not like Chromatic Lantern. I do not like it in monocolor, 2-color, 3-color decks. I might consider it for a 4-color deck. And even at that, I think it's a maybe in a 5-color deck. I'm actually not a big fan of this card to begin with. And whenever you start to make your ramp more expensive than your commander, I really don't see the point. So I did remove Chromatic Lantern, and this is why I put the Talisman in earlier. I think it's super important that your ramp be as cheap as you can possibly make it. And I know that that's just a 1 mana difference, but I do feel like that does have the potential to really cost you like a turn if you have to pay that extra 1. I mean, that's the potential of you not being able to use a food token and not being able to proc your commander with it, in which case Frodo's a 1/3. The next card we're going to be removing, I'm probably going to get an equal amount of flack for, and that is Well of Lost Dreams. This is 4 mana for an artifact that says whenever you gain life, you may pay X, where X is less than or equal to the amount of life you gained. If you do, you draw X cards. All right. So you pay 1 mana, you crack a food. You pay 3 mana, you draw 3 cards. That's 4 mana of attacks and whatever else we did that turn. Now, it does say up to that amount of life that you gain, so you can always just like pay 1. There's other draw engines that are just better. I think Frodo himself, is actually a very good draw engine with him being able to get extra card draw in with the ring, as long as he is the ring bearer. So I'm not a big fan of Wall of Lost Dreams, and we're already being taxed enough.
You know, David, I'm going to get a lot of slack here as well, but I'm going to join you. I actually do not like this card. I hate wasting my turns doing just one thing, and if I'm just cracking mana for just to draw cards and not do anything else, it's pointless.
Yeah. I'm also one of those weird people that even if it's just like 1 mana that I have that I could potentially spend on this and I can't do anything else, I would rather keep that 1 mana up to bluff that I maybe have removal in my hand.
I mean, it's a good bluff. It scares me all the time. All right, David, any instants or sorceries removed from the Precon?
We do have a single sorcery that's going to be cut here, and that is Revive the Shire. That is 1 and a green for a sorcery that says return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand, and you create a food token. I love the food token production on this thing. I also love the fact that we can get some recursion. I think this honestly is actually a fairly solid card. We just had to make a couple of cuts to make sure that we could fit in the other good things, and this was a victim of it.
Victim understood. You added some fun lands. What lands did you get rid of, bud?
All right, so we're going to be cutting a couple of lands. The first one here is Access Tunnel. This is a land that you can tap for a colorless, or you can pay 3 mana, tap it, and target creature with power 3 or less can't be blocked this turn. This card sounds really cool. It actually does nothing in this deck. And let me go ahead and explain why. Access Tunnel only allows little things to get in for damage. But we're playing with the ring. And the ring's first mode is that it allows a little thing to get in for damage. Eventually, if our creatures get too big, Access Tunnel actually doesn't do anything. And in the late game, we do want our creatures to start growing and getting a little bit bigger or more impactful. That way we can capitalize on the 3rd and 4th modes of the ring. So Access Tunnel doesn't do anything. And this is a card that, because it just comes down and only taps for a colorless, and because our mana base is already so stressed with needing to have all 3 colors by turn 3, I feel like this is a trap card in this deck.
I mean, at the end of the day, David, I feel like you have pretty good opportunities with Rogue's Passage. Just pay the extra 1, call it a day.
Yeah, and the big benefit there of Rogue's Passage, I know that it has a lot of the same pitfalls and downfalls as Access Tunnel, but Rogue's Passage can make any creature unblockable. So we can make one of our big things later on unblockable. Next up here, we're going to be removing Murmuring Bosk. This is a land forest. It can tap for a green. And it says, whenever it enters the battlefield, you may reveal a Tree Folk card from your hand. If you don't, it enters the battlefield tapped. You can also tap it for a white or a black, and it deals 1 damage to you. I see that why this card was originally included in the Precon, but sadly, we have cut almost all of the Tree Folk. So this is always just going to be a tapped land. And then having to lose 1 life every single time we want a white or a black. I don't think it's going to kill us, but it is going to be an annoyance. So I did actually cut this card. Scattered Groves is a land that is both a forest and a plains. You can tap for either a green or a white. It says it enters the battlefield tapped, and it's got a cycling ability for 2 mana. Always entering the battlefield tapped is like the worst possible words that you could put on a land, and it immediately makes me just want to like replace this with quite literally anything else. So we are.
I mean, not to mention cycling too. How awful is this land?
Sadly, we are going to be removing Shire Terrace. I know the Hobbit's deck or Halfling deck is removing the Shire. This is a land that taps for a colorless, or you can pay 1 mana, tap it, and sacrifice it to search your library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. I actually do like this card quite a bit. If you are the kind of player that likes Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse, Shire Terrace is probably a card that you would consider. Being able to tap it immediately for a colorless is actually a kind of a cool upside versus the other 2 cards that I just talked about. But ultimately, this is once again a colorless card that taxes us if we need to go find the correct color of land, and we just can't afford to have that in this deck. And then the very last card we're going to be cutting here is a basic swamp. And that was to make room for the basic plains that we included. So we did kind of tweak the basic lands in this list.
All right, David. Well, that is quite the upgrade, my friend. I am terrified of getting hit by a very large board. Any final thoughts on the deck?
I think the deck is quite a bit of fun, and I do think that there's multiple ways that you could build this. Like what I alluded to earlier on in the video, I think that you could probably dedicate a little bit more towards the life gain or towards the food. I tried to play a little bit more of a middle ground and focus still kind of like on what the deck wants to do straight out of the box. So I think that's pretty cool. I love Frodo and Sam as commanders. I think they're very interesting and a lot of fun to play with. And I do recommend this deck if you're looking to go pick up this as just like another Precon to add to your collection, or if you're a fan of the Lord of the Rings who's never played Magic the Gathering before. I think this deck is actually a slam dunk. I'm very, very happy with this.
All right, guys, and that was David's $300 upgrade for the Food and Fellowship Precon for Lord of the Rings. Let us know down below what he added that you really liked or you didn't like. Let us know what he took out that he probably should have kept in. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe. That way you can always stay tuned for all the fun videos we're putting out. Also, don't forget to check out our Twitter, our Instagram, and our TikTok. It is @GuysAtMagic for all 3 of those. And as always, guys, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.
Later.